All right, so it's Friday, March 21st, 2025, and welcome to the Finl Daily Brief.
Episode number 5.
That's right, episode number 5 already.
Yeah.
And we are going to be talking about today's financial and economic news.
Yeah, the key movers, the ones you really got to know.
Exactly.
Like we always do. Yeah, a bit of a roundup of everything.
The stuff that matters, yeah.
From all sorts of places.
Yeah.
So, I guess the big story today is how positive things are looking in Indian equity markets right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't just, one sector or two sectors doing well. It was pretty much across the board we saw gains.
Yeah.
And, the Nifty 50 closed at 2350.40, up 0.69%.
Yeah, that's a pretty decent jump.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually what was really interesting today is the mid and small cap companies, they really took the lead. So the Nifty Mid Cap 150, that surged 19,203.3. Oh, wow. A 1.34% increase. And then if you look at the small cap segment,
yeah,
the Nifty Small Cap 250 climbed even higher, 2.14%, finishing at 15,242.3. Oh.
That's huge.
It's really remarkable, isn't it, when you see that kind of broad participation across not just the big players, but the smaller companies as well.
Yeah, definitely.
It suggests a real kind of widespread optimism, right?
Yeah, and even, for the Nifty Total Market Index to finish the picture there, it rose 1.01% to close at 11,962.8.
So overall, really a very good day.
Yeah.
For Indian stocks.
Encouraging,
yeah. Now, bond markets.
Yeah, so if we switch over to bonds, we did see the yield on the 10-year government bond tick up a little bit.
Okay.
Closed at 6.68% yesterday, the 20th of March.
Right.
So a small move, but, it's something to keep an eye on because sometimes even those little shifts can tell us something. Yeah, it's all about the trends.
Yeah, exactly. And then over on the currency front.
Yeah, the rupee's been making some moves.
Yeah.
Against the U.S. dollar.
The rupee's been having quite a week, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Appreciated by 0.7%, closing at 85.94.
That's significant, right?
That's a big jump. In the world of, global currencies, that's a pretty strong performance.
Yeah, for sure.
And actually, if you zoom out a little bit, look at the bigger picture. This is actually the rupee's biggest weekly gain in over 2 years.
Really?
Yeah, at one point it even hit 85.9725.
Wow.
Yeah. So that kind of appreciation, it doesn't happen every day, and it certainly gets people talking.
It does. And, what are the reasons behind this?
Well, the main thing is we're seeing a lot of foreign exchange coming into the country.
Right.
And that's always going to strengthen the rupee.
Okay.
And then on top of that, there's been something that market analysts call an unwinding of long dollar positions.
Yeah.
Now you can kind of think of that as like some investors who had been betting on the dollar getting even stronger are now kind of changing their minds.
Right.
And that's putting some downward pressure on the dollar, which in turn, helps the rupee appreciate even more.
Okay, I see.
So yeah, a combination of those things is really giving the rupee a boost right now.
Now let's dig a little deeper into some of the things that might be driving, all this enthusiasm that we're seeing.
Yeah.
So one key indicator we can look at is the activity of foreign portfolio investors.
Yeah.
And on March 20th, they were net buyers of Indian bonds to the tune of $352.8 million.
Right. So essentially what that means is that foreign investors are showing more confidence in the Indian economy.
Right.
Because when they put their money into our bonds, it means they see stability, they see potential for future growth.
Right.
They see our debt as attractive, and, that's a really good sign for anyone who's tracking where global investment is going.
Yeah, so it's like they're giving a vote of confidence, you could say.
Absolutely. It's a vote of confidence in our financial foundation.
Now, the IT sector, that's another area that continues to perform well, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like the world just can't get enough of digital services.
Yeah.
And then when you combine that with the fact that Indian IT companies are producing some really strong earnings reports,
yeah,
it means this sector is going to remain a real powerhouse, a real driver of our economy.
Right. And it seems like it's a need that just keeps growing.
Yeah, absolutely. The world's appetite for digital solutions just keeps expanding. And, Indian IT firms are in a fantastic position to capitalize on that.
For sure. Now, looking outside India for a second.
Yeah.
What kind of impact are global economic factors having on what we're seeing in Indian markets?
Well, this is where things get interesting.
Yeah.
Because if we look at the U.S. Federal Reserve,
right,
they recently came out with an update on their economic outlook.
Yeah.
And they actually lowered their projections for U.S. economic growth in 2025.
Okay.
And they've also confirmed that they're still planning on making 2 interest rate cuts later this year.
So how does that impact us, decisions that are happening thousands of miles away?
Well, essentially, when a huge economy like the U.S. says that they're expecting slower growth and that they might cut interest rates, it can have a ripple effect around the world.
Right.
Sometimes, when developed markets like the U.S. are not growing as fast, investors start looking towards emerging markets like India for better returns.
Right.
But it also creates a bit of uncertainty in the global economic environment,
Sure. Yeah.
which is something we always have to be mindful of.
Right. It's like it's all interconnected.
Yeah, it's like a big complex web of economic influences.
Yeah. Now, let's touch on commodities briefly.
Yeah.
We saw pretty stable gold prices and crude oil futures trading around $73.5 per barrel.
Right, so that stability generally suggests that things are relatively balanced in terms of global supply and demand for those key commodities.
Right. Okay.
So for anyone who's following the commodity markets, it's a bit of a calm period, at least for now.
So when we put all of this together, all these different pieces, the markets, the rupee, the global economy, how would you sum up the mood?
Well, I think the recent market performance really shows that investors are feeling cautiously optimistic.
Okay.
All those foreign exchange inflows we talked about.
Yeah.
Not only are they boosting the rupee, but they're also indicating a real underlying confidence in the Indian economy.
Yeah.
And that's a big factor contributing to the positive sentiment we're seeing.
Right. And, looking beyond the overall market, are there any particular sectors that you think are looking particularly strong or promising?
Well, definitely the IT sector is still going strong.
Right.
Driven by that global demand and their strong earnings.
Yeah.
But I think another area to watch is the manufacturing sector, because the government is really pushing to boost manufacturing in India. And that could create a lot of opportunities, particularly for mid-cap and small-cap companies, which tend to be more focused on the domestic market.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's something to keep an eye on.
Now, we did talk about some uncertainty coming from those potential U.S. Federal Reserve rate cuts.
Yeah.
How should investors think about that? How should they navigate that?
I think the key takeaway there is just to stay informed.
Yeah.
Keep an eye on those important economic indicators coming out of the U.S., things like consumer confidence, inflation figures, employment data.
Right.
All those things can give us clues about how healthy their economy is and how likely they are to actually go through with those rate cuts.
Okay.
Because what happens in the U.S. can have a real impact on our market, so we got to stay in the loop.
Right. Okay. So for our listeners who are, thinking about where to put their attention, what are some key themes that they should be thinking about?
Well, there are a few really compelling ones, I think.
Okay.
Firstly, domestic consumption in India is continuing to grow,
Right.
driven by, our expanding middle class. So there are going to be ongoing opportunities in sectors like consumer goods and services.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then, of course, we have this incredible digital transformation happening all across the economy, led by our tech firms.
Yeah.
It continues to be a really promising area for investment.
Right.
And then finally, I think infrastructure development is another area with huge long-term potential.
Okay.
The government is putting a lot of support behind that. So I think that's a sector that could see sustained growth.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. As we wrap things up, what's your one key piece of advice for investors right now?
I would say the most sensible approach is to maintain a balanced portfolio.
Right.
Take into account all those macroeconomic trends we discussed,
Yeah.
but also look at the specifics of different sectors.
Right.
And, diversification is always a good idea, spreading your investments across different sectors and different types of assets.
Yeah.
That can help you manage risk, particularly when there's a bit of global uncertainty on the horizon.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to summarize today's Finwell Daily Brief,
Yeah.
we saw a really positive day in the Indian equity markets, a
Yeah.
strengthening rupee,
Yep.
and we talked about some of the big global economic factors that are at play.
Including those potential rate cuts from the U.S. Federal Reserve.
Right, and we highlighted some key investment themes to watch.
Things like growth in domestic consumption, the digital transformation, the infrastructure story.
Absolutely, and a reminder to all our listeners, if you found this briefing helpful and want to stay up to date with all the latest financial and economic news, be sure to subscribe to the Finwell Daily Brief.
Yeah, we're bringing you these concise updates regularly so you can stay informed.
And if you have any questions or want to dive deeper into any of these topics, you can reach out to SOS Finwell on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to chat and answer your questions.
Yeah, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our future briefings.
And on that note, I'd like to leave you with a quote from the legendary investor Benjamin Graham. He said,
Oh, yeah.
"The individual investor should act consistently as an investor, and not as a speculator.
Words to live by. That was the FinWell Daily Brief for March 21st, 2025. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next time. Bye.